Hello, my name is Isabella Rodriguez. I went through the Running Start program at Wenatchee Valley College. There I learned my love for education and the importance of education to pursue my passion for people. I then went on to the University of Washington, where I obtained my bachelor's degree in history and diversity. As of now, I currently am volunteering at the YWCA, and I'm also actively involved in many various civil engagement activities. I would first like to thank you all so much for attending tonight. North Central Washington Young Voters is excited to be hosting the second Meet the Candidate Forum, where young people in North Central Washington have the opportunity to ask questions of candidates and voice their concerns. Today, we'll be speaking with our two candidates for Secretary of State, Secretary Wyman and Representative Tarleton, who will field questions and discuss the duties and responsibilities of the position. North Central Washington Young Voters is dedicated to improving voter education and awareness, enhancing young people's civic engagement, and making sure young people's voices are at the table. We hope that tonight serves to answer some of your questions and paves the way for greater representation of your voice. The event will consist of 3 sections. The first will consist of voter registration information and an overview of duties of Secretary of State. The second section will consist of questions submitted by local young voters. The third and final section will be a combination of previously submitted questions and questions submitted during the event. You can submit questions live by commenting on Facebook or YouTube live stream. Now let's meet our moderators. Aiden, would you like to start?
Yes, so my name is Aiden Ringel. I'm 18 years old and I'm a senior at Cascade High School. I'm on the Leavenworth City Residential Advisory Committee, along with the steering committee for the Osborne Estate. I'm a part of the Knowledge Bowl and Sustainability Club at my high school. And I deeply care about the climate and believe that this election is going to shape more than just the next 4 years in America.
Lazo, if you'd like to go next.
All right. Thank you for being here, Representative Tarleton and Secretary Wyman. My name is Lazo Gitchos. I was born and raised in the Methow Valley. I'm a sophomore at Yale University, and I'm taking a gap year this year to work on organizing locally for the Methow Valley Citizens Council. And I am excited to be here. I think North Central Washington Young Voters is going to make a real difference. So I'm excited to be involved.
And Heather, if you could go next.
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm a 16-year-old student from Wenatchee, Washington. I'm currently a junior at Wenatchee High School, and I'm passionate about the environment and making an impact through peaceful action.
Now, if each candidate could introduce themselves, starting with Secretary Wyman.
Hello, good evening. Imagine receiving your ballot the day after an election. That's what happened to my husband and I when we were living in Germany, and our ballots arrived the day after an election. A few years later, I found myself as the elections director in Thurston County, and I made a pledge to myself that I would make sure that no voter in my charge ever experienced what I went through. And now, 27 years later, I've been able to keep that promise, and I'm really proud to tell you that. Voting and voting rights are the most important thing that I do in my job. And over the last 27 years, I've had a continuous record of conducting over 120 elections and being a state and nationally certified election administrator. And these jobs are really important, or these qualities are really important in doing this job. So tonight, you have an opportunity to be on a job interview, and I encourage you to compare my resume to my opponents, because this job, it's important to have the job-related experience and the ability to make sure our elections remain fair and accurate by balancing access and security. And that's what I bring to the Secretary of State's office. And I appreciate you putting together this event this evening so all of you can be exposed to candidates and make decisions if you're old enough to vote. And if you're not, I'm really impressed that you're here tonight, because we know that people who see the importance of voting at a young age become lifelong voters. And I hope that is true of all of you. I'm Kim Wyman, and I look forward to tonight's event.
Secretary Tarleton, if you could go ahead. Representative.
Representative. I am Representative Gail Tarleton. I am running for Secretary of State. Thank you to all of you and your friends and your peers in all of your colleges, universities, and high schools. It is terrific to see you engaged in our democracy now when you can shape the future. And the reason I'm running for Secretary of State is that we need to shape the future of our democracy in the 21st century. And the job that used to happen needs to be done differently. And it needs a whole new way of thinking about voter education and voter participation and being a champion of voting rights as our communities change, as we face different kinds of threats, such as a pandemic or a climate event or a domestic attack on our elections or a foreign attack on our elections and our attempt to undermine the legitimacy of our democracy. I have been working for more than 30 years as in a national security and defense intelligence arena. I want to bring that expertise and experience in both federal service. I had nearly 10 years in federal service as an intelligence analyst. I had 12 years in the private sector leading intelligence technology programs in Russia and Ukraine after the Cold War ended. I worked at the University of Washington on staff to build research institutes and student scholarships and graduate fellowships for students exploring research in all different areas, including national security and cybersecurity. I was a local Port of Seattle commissioner for 5 years in the last Great Recession. And now I have been a state legislator, both on the Technology and Economic Development Committee, the Higher Education Committee, and the Transportation Committee, as well as House Majority Floor Leader, where I led the effort to get a 100% clean grid bill through the legislature in 2018 and in 2019. I would look forward to this debate because we need a change in leadership to address the future threats to our elections. I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions because you're the ones who are going to lead us into that future. And I'd like to hear what you have to say and what you're thinking about. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you. Heather, if you'd like to begin section 1.
Again, thank you both for being here. The first question is, how do people register to vote, and when does this have to be done by? This question is for either candidate.
Secretary, I think you should proceed.
I was more than willing to.
And I'll just add, my perspective as a voter here for nearly 30 years. I'll offer something like that. Okay.
Fair. So in Washington State, we have a number of ways that you can register to vote. The first and the easiest way for, I think, most of the people on this call tonight is online, and that's going to votewa.gov. And you can do that up until October 26th, which is 8 days before Election Day. You can also use a paper form, old-fashioned, old-school paper form, and mail that in. But again, it has to be received by the 26th of October. After that date, right through Election Day at 8 o'clock, you can register to vote in person at your county elections voting center or county courthouse, and that is true of anyone who meets the qualifications and is eligible. And one of the things I'm proud of with Washington is that we have a lot of opportunities for people to vote, and I have to give credit to the legislature and Representative Tarleton for the movement that they made on really some great bills like 16 and 17-year-old pre-registration, automatic registration, and same day, because this is the first year in a presidential election we get to enact those laws.
I'd just like to add a couple of things. I've moved around a lot in my life. I've grew up in Massachusetts and voted there the first time when I turned 18. Lived in Washington, D.C. to go to college. Lived in Arlington, Virginia when I was working in the Pentagon, and then had the opportunity to live for a year in California when my husband was sent to graduate school there. And then we've lived here in Seattle, Washington for nearly 30 years. So I voted in many different states and through many different systems. and I've voted here since before we were vote by mail statewide. So I want to just emphasize a couple of things about elections this year. Do not pull an all-nighter like you might when you're still in high school there, or when you're in college, or when you're working on a major research proposal for a fellowship, for example. Plan ahead. Think about, you want your vote to be counted, so get to know your local auditor's office really well. Every county has a great auditor and elections director, depending on which county we live in. They're called different things. Their website, along with votewa.gov and the Secretary of State, sos.wa.gov, have really important information about timelines and deadlines. This year, because of the attacks on the U.S. Postal Service and our uncertainty about whether postmarking will actually happen if you vote on election day, don't assume it's going to get postmarked. Find your local ballot box. I wanted to make sure we got that in everyone's head right now.
Thank you for both answering. The next question is, where and how do I turn in my ballot? Again, either candidate can answer. Representative, you're on mute currently.
I missed the first part of the question. Where and how?
Where and how do I turn in my ballot?
So you have several options. The most important thing to know is where your post office box is in the community you live in, where your ballot drop box is, and where your county auditor's office is, or other voting centers in your county. All of that information would be available for the county facilities on the county auditor's website. The Secretary of State website also has information about where ballot drop boxes are located. If you use your local post office, make sure you give yourself a couple of days advance opportunity to get the ballot into the post office. Make sure it is postmarked at least a couple of days, if not 5 days, before election day. We do have disruptions going on, so just be on the lookout for what day it is you are trying to mail your ballot or put it in a drop box. Really important to know, everybody, the local auditors control the drop boxes. They are safe, they are secure, and your ballot is picked up by a local auditor employee. And also, you do not need to use a stamp. No stamps required, whether you use the Postal Service or the ballot drop box. So just make sure your ballot is signed, make sure it is sealed, and make sure it is delivered on time.
And I would just add, those of you who, as you're looking towards November, having a plan for voting is really important. Now is a good time to check and make sure your registration information is up to date so we can get you the right ballot at the right address on the first try. But in terms of turning your ballot back in, the drop boxes will close sharply at 8 o'clock election night statewide. There's over 500 of those drop boxes available. And if you decide to put it into a blue mailbox, there's a little sheet on there that says when the last pickup time is, and you want to make sure you get it in before that last pickup time if you wait until election day. And even if you go into your local post office, make sure they give you a canceled stamp, a postmark of election day, because in some of the small rural post offices, you may have missed the pickup time. So it's really important that we get your ballot back and we can count it, and that's what we want to do.
Thank you. The next question is, what are the responsibilities of the Secretary of State?
All right, you got to pick one of us. So I don't want to be too overbearing here. So the Secretary of State. Ooh, there we go. Wait. Okay. Secretary of State's office is responsible for 4 major parts of state government. They include overseeing the state's elections as the chief election officer, overseeing the state archives and library, which is where our state's history rests, and finally, the corporations and charities division, where every for-profit and nonprofit corporation in the state has to file to provide you as consumers information. We also have a number of smaller programs like the Address Confidentiality Program, which provides a protection of addresses, your physical address for survivors of domestic violence and stalking by having their mail sent to a P.O. box so that they don't have to disclose it in places where it might be compromise their physical safety. And we have a number of other programs like Legacy Washington and the Combined Fund Drive. So there you go.
Representative, if you want to add anything.
Yes, I actually would like to make the case that we think forward and we look at the role of the Secretary of State, of what it needs to be in our future, where we have threats of foreign and domestic interference in our elections. That it's happening right now. Foreign interference happened in 2016. Foreign interference is happening right now in 2020. And domestic attacks are happening from Donald Trump's attacks on vote by mail and on the U.S. Postal Service and his performance on the national debate stage on Tuesday night, where he took a direct hit at the legitimacy of our elections when we have to vote by mail because of this pandemic, was the clear and present danger to me that we need to think ahead and define the roles and responsibilities of the Chief Elections Officer, the Secretary of State, in a way that is thinking about voter education, being a champion for voter education, for voter participation for every single person who has the right to vote in this state, and for being a champion for defending our elections against any kind of interference, whether it's foreign attacks, domestic attacks, or things like pandemics or major climate events that could disrupt our elections. The Secretary of State should be someone who backs up the 39 county auditors that run our elections on the ground every time there is an election. They need to have their backs so that they can do their job.
Thank you. The next question is, how will you work to ensure you are accountable to the needs and concerns of your constituents? This question is for both Secretary Wyman and Representative Tarleton.
The most important responsibility of every elected official is to be available to their constituents and to have an open door as they are performing their work for the people. I have served in public office now for 13 years and been a public civil servant for 25 years of my working life. Being able to serve the best interests of the public, to understand what is happening in different communities, is by the vote. If you give me your vote, even if you don't give me your vote, you have a right to be represented by me. Another way I have served the people of this state is by going to every community, whether I'm in my legislative work or in my personal responsibilities. I visit communities, I hold legislative town halls, I hold community meetings with my colleagues where we have joint meetings to hear from different communities around the state. I invite people to give public testimony, both remotely as well as via or in person or via letters to all of us. As an executive who represents every person in this state, regardless of whether those individuals are voters, I would be absolutely committed to making sure I was showing up in your community to have an understanding of what is affecting you and why your right to vote needs to be protected where you live.
Thank you. Secretary Wyman?
Yes, I mean, what's really exciting about being a statewide official is that you do get to go to every community in the state, and that's what I've done over the last 8 years, is really try to have a transparent office where we're sharing with the public what we're doing and why we're doing it, and really trying to operate the office in a nonpartisan way that represents everyone in the state. And I have to tell you that my favorite part of the job is getting to go into high schools and colleges and talk about the importance of voting and the importance of your vote, and really try to inspire the confidence of the people in those audiences of seeing their own power and seeing the value of their vote. And it is about outreach to communities. I completely agree with my opponent on this issue. It is about getting into each community and finding out what their needs are, finding out what barriers they might have to voting and overcoming them. One of the things, for example, that we've been doing in partnership with the Yakima County auditor, is working with the Yakima Nation, because people who live on Indian tribal land don't have necessarily traditional addresses that the USPS would use. So we created a system in our voter registration system where we can geocode an address, drop a pin exactly where they live, which also serves people experiencing homelessness who don't have a traditional address, and really getting in there and making sure that they're eligible to vote on the issues on where they live.
Great. Thank you. That concludes the first session, and I will pass it off to Lazo.
All right, thank you. Our first question comes from Lisa Witowski, age 26, from Leavenworth. It's kind of a two-part question, so bear with me. Over time, and especially during the current election year, many Americans, including myself, have begun to lose confidence in our democracy due to corruption, big money influence, and unfair election practices such as gerrymandering. In what ways do you plan to restore confidence in our democracy to the American people? And the second part is, do you personally believe that we need to evolve the current political system and election practices and make them not only more fair, but more representative of what the overall American population, not the billionaires and corporations, need? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Whom would you like to begin?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Representative Tarleton, I'll let you go
Very
first.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. How to solve the challenges of our time in 1 minute and 30 seconds. I would love to address how do we restore our faith in democracy. It is so crucial that we direct our attention to both federal policy and state policy on how we are expanding voting rights, how we are expanding voter participation, paying attention to when voting rights are being abused, when they are being suppressed in different parts of the country. And I really do think it's important to raise the fact that our Secretary of State has been our secretary for 7.5 years. And during that period, she has led the Republican Secretaries of State Leadership Council nationally, where she had an opportunity to work with secretaries of state who were involved in voter suppression efforts, like in Georgia, like in Kansas, purging voter rolls, taking absentee ballots and declaring them invalid, and having federal courts have to overrule and throw out some of these actions by those secretaries of state. We need to be a voice where we are for everyone's rights to vote. And how we take corporate money out of politics is a really big deal. I am endorsed by End Citizens United because I am not taking corporate money or corporate PAC money. I have introduced legislation to give free TV time to candidates so that it would take the biggest cost out of running elections and reduce the influence and the control of large corporations. And until we end Citizens United, those are the steps states must take to protect the opportunities for the right to vote in every state.
Thank you.
So I'm really proud of Washington State and how we conduct elections and how we are transparent in the way that we do elections. And I think that to answer the question directly, the first thing I would do is start educating younger voters about the things that we do and how we do them differently here in Washington. First and foremost, we have the most transparent public disclosure laws in the country, and you can look up where our money comes from, and you can actually follow the money and where those transfers come from. Second, which is really to the heart of the gerrymandering question, we have a redistricting commission that is a bipartisan commission. It's balanced and it's fair to both parties. And so you don't have the political gerrymandering that you see in other states. I mean, it is a very political process, but both parties have equal footing and are really motivated to make sure that they do it in a bipartisan way, because if they don't decide, it goes to the Supreme Court. So in terms of the future and ways that we can make sure that communities are more representative, certainly we we've seen in the last couple of years. The courts weighing in Yakima, the city council race where it was actually determined that they needed to do district-only elections instead of in just the primary, doing it in both the general and the primary. So I think innovations like that we need to consider, and I am proud of the inclusive system that we have here. It is fair and it's transparent, and I think it's a model for the rest of the country.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Torin, age 18 of Wenatchee. What will you do to increase voter turnout? Secretary Wyman, to you first.
Sorry about that. Voter turnout is something that's really driven in large part of what's on the ballot. And certainly we're seeing that this year we'll have record-breaking turnout in November, and that's incredibly exciting. We had record-setting turnout in the primary election we just had, and we haven't had that high of turnout since 1964. But we can always do better, and it is always about engaging people and providing information and removing barriers. And I think that that's, again, what I'm most proud of in being an architect and one of the people that helped build the system we have over the last 27 years of really making our system, like I said, arguably the most inclusive and accessible, secure system in the country. That's why the country is turning to Washington to how do we do vote by mail elections? How do we have online registration for all voters? How do we remove those barriers? And I really stand on my record. My opponent is going to try to paint me as a right-wing conservative Republican who helps other Republicans get elected. And yes, I do. In fact, I've been involved on the national level with organizations to try to find more people of color to run as conservative candidates, to try to get more women to run as conservative candidates. And I'm going to continue to do that work because I want my party to be more like the American public and less like the old white guys party that it seems to be at the moment. So I'm running on my track record, and it is about making sure that everyone's included.
Thank you very much, Representative Tarleton.
Could you repeat the question, please? Yeah.
I don't think he heard that.
I'm sorry, my video cut out for a second. Can you repeat that?
Got it. Yeah, could you just repeat the question? Is it increasing voter participation? Was that the question?
Oh,
or
yeah,
voter turnout?
Sorry. Yeah, what will you do to increase voter turnout?
Excellent. I started the effort this past session in 2020. We introduced legislation and got legislation through to help fund our local auditors for the costs of state and federal elections. Here in Washington State, the local auditors have a lot of responsibilities to conduct the elections, do voter education, voter awareness, informing voters in their native language, informing voters who have disabilities using Braille and other techniques, producing voter pamphlet statements for every election, not just for a general election. Most counties don't have the resources that are required to do that kind of voter education and outreach to 5.9 million eligible voters. In this state, we have somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people who are eligible to vote, who are citizens, but are not even registered. We need to tackle the reasons why. What are the barriers? Why are those individuals not participating? What is the representation of those groups? Is it young people? Is it those with disabilities? Is it people of color who are in communities who feel completely disenfranchised? We need to collect that data, and we need audits to do it in different counties around this state. The other thing that we must do is that we must show people not just how to vote, but why we vote. That is our democracy of the future. Having as many voices as possible be heard is how we strengthen who we are as a democratic society.
Thank you. The next question comes from Chelsea, age 30, from Leavenworth. And the question is, what will you do to make sure voters are educated? So, Representative Tarleton, this goes to you. You're still muted.
This is a core part of governing. It's a partnership among state and local officials. It's working with federal agencies to make sure that we are bringing the financial resources into our state that can be deployed around the state. This is a responsibility not just of the Secretary of State, it is of the legislative bodies to be working with the Secretary of State and with the local auditors and with community organizations, many of whom have endorsed me because they know I have worked as a Port of Seattle commissioner with their communities to bring them into jobs and opportunities. As a legislator, I have created educational opportunities, educational funding for students to have access to the resources to go to college and to get an apprenticeship certification and to make sure that they are participating in our communities, having an opportunity to earn a decent living. It is the same way about voter education. How does your voice get heard in our democracy? It is through your vote. And when your vote is at risk, every other right you have is at risk, because this is how we change the way our economy works, our educational system works, our healthcare system works, and our society works. Your vote is your voice. And I look forward to bringing as many voices as possible into our state's democracy.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
And you're muted, Lazo.
Sorry about that.
I'm so glad it's not just me.
Question is, what will you do to make sure that voters are educated?
Yes, voter education, really starts, I think, when people are young. And that's why we've put an emphasis on having K through 12 programs that are age appropriate, teaching students about the importance of voting, why we do it, how you do it, and giving them real world experience that's age appropriate. And the idea is, if you find out when you're younger that voting is important, you'll become a lifelong voter. And studies have shown that. And again, just taking that throughout the communities beyond that, getting into universities and colleges and talking to students, and again, trying to make that connection of the power of their voice and the power of their vote. Working with our county partners to do creative things like what you've seen in Kittitas County, where the auditor has partnered with the students at Central Washington University to have a real student engagement hub that actually became a model for the law that was passed that is going to make student engagement hubs at 10 universities across the state in November. And so that's exciting. And how do we make young people see the value of voting and engagement? And then finally, getting into communities where they live. And I know King County has done some really incredible work where they've given local grants so that individual communities can tailor those messages and that voter education and outreach to their community in a way that's going to really remove those barriers and get them engaged. So I think it's across multiple platforms and in multiple ways.
Okay, thank you. Our final question is the final question of this section is from Ben Parniuk, age 31, from Leavenworth. And he says, Secretary Wyman, thank you for being on record stating that we need to make sure our elections are free from outside influence and that mail-in voting works. After a recent story regarding your participation in Heritage Foundation-led meetings that might have been organized in order to prove voter fraud, I'm hoping you can comment on your statements in that meeting that showcase your trust in Washington State's mail-in voting system and its utter lack of any discernible fraud.
Absolutely. And this is something that has definitely been raised by my opponent. The Heritage Foundation, if you're not aware, is a very conservative-leaning group that certainly does not believe that vote-by-mail elections are something we should be doing. And so I have attended meetings with them to find out what they're saying and what those criticisms are. In the very same way that I meet with people that are in groups that lean left, from the Brennan Center to getting to be a part of a conversation conversation about Native American voting at the Carter Center to meeting with the ACLU and Represent Us, and I could go on and on. My point is as Secretary of State, I need to represent everyone, and that's what I do. And I listen to all points of view and try to make our elections better. I'm really proud of the vote by mail system that we've built here in Washington over the last 27 years actually, and it's really inclusive and it's secure, and it has allowed me to on a national level talk about and really present Washington's experience to voters across the country. When the president is taking shots at vote by mail elections in particular, we can talk about the low propensity of fraud and the low history of fraud here in Washington state, that we don't have that our system is accessible and secure. And I can refute with the facts how Washington votes is a way that does work across the country. And that's what I've been doing for the last 9 months and will continue to do in the future.
Thank you. Representative Tarleton, do you have any comments on these appearances at these meetings or something you would like to share in your minute and a half?
One thing we know about secret meetings that happen, because our president has conducted several of them with the president of Russia, we don't know what was actually said at a secret meeting because it was not recorded and it was not in public. There is no equivalence between a meeting with the Heritage Foundation and the Brennan Center. The Brennan Center is a highly respected, well-renowned, nonpartisan organization that, like the Pew Research Center, or like any university research center, the Ruckelshaus Center here in Washington State, we have so many great universities and colleges that have truly nonpartisan, well-established and highly regarded experts on all sides of the equation. When our president and our attorney general attacked voting by mail as fraudulent and leading to rigged elections months and months ago, they did that without any Republican official at the national or state levels fighting back, specifically saying, no, voting by mail is not fraudulent. It is the safest, securest, most importantly, healthy way we are going to conduct elections in this election season. And my view of this whole story that we are in is we are right now having ballots cast by mail around this country. And there are millions of voters who are still wondering, will their ballot get counted or will it be fraudulent?
Thank you. That concludes the questions for our section. Thank you both very much. And I am now going to pass the moderatorship to Aiden.
Hello, thank you guys for coming on tonight. So our first question is from Chelsea from Leavenworth, age 30, and I'll have Representative Tarleton answer first. Besides voting, what are some of the biggest actions you would advise people to take in order to create change?
Start with voting. If you are eligible to register, get registered. And if you are registered, vote. You become a voter, and that is how you can persuade others to take a stake in changing what is happening in their local community. You know, I'm one of 7 kids, and I grew up north of Boston in a really small town. And my mom used to say to her 7 kids, do the best you can where you live every day. That is how change happens. It's seeing something that's wrong and you want to find a way to change it. It's seeing a group of people who share an idea that you want to have a clean environment. You want to have protections of salmon. You want to have the opportunities for healthcare. You want to have the right to have a say in whether your right to vote is being protected and whether you can use your voice to change the policies that govern our country, our states, and our local communities. It all begins with voting, and that is where I began my career. I worked for 25 years and voted every chance I got because practice makes perfect, and voting meant I was having a say in what happened in my community and in my state and in my country. If I hadn't been voting, I would never have taken the step to say, now it's time to run for office. And believe me, voting for a lifetime is your best path to being ready to run for office. And I hope all of you decide to do that someday.
Thank you. Representative or Secretary Wyman, your response?
Yeah, thank you. And certainly voting is the starting point. But what I would say is first of all, figure out the things that interest you. Where are your passions? What is the field of study or the area that really interests you? And then follow it and learn about it and become your best at whatever that is. And my passion has been public service. I was very fortunate and blessed early in my life to find my calling in the profession, and then to find elections, which really is my passion, early in my career, and was able to really learn the profession and become good at it and become a leader in it. And this is serving me really well this year because of navigating these difficult waters during the COVID-19 environment and really trying to help states solve the problem of how they're going to make a safe voting environment for their voters when their state maybe only has a 5% absentee rate and they're not used to dealing with mail-in ballots. And so find your passion, be good at it. And when the opportunities present themselves, you're going to be ready to lead. You're going to be ready to lead that change. And I think when you're doing something you love and you're following that path, all of that hard work becomes the change you want to see. I mean, that Gandhi expression is really, quite honestly, why I'm a Republican to this day. This is what I'd like my party to be: inclusive and representative of people around the country. And I want to be that change in my own party. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much. This next question is from Quinn, age 18 of Leavenworth. How will you advertise to other states that mail-in voting works and isn't prone to fraud? Secretary Wyman, your response?
Well, Quinn, you just summed up my life over the last 8 months. It started with getting on the phone and talking to my colleagues across the country and working with them to help solve the problems in their states. And as I mentioned in the last question, it's a big lift for some states. Some states have 5% or less of their ballots cast by mail in a given election. So they had a lot to ramp up, a lot of lessons learned. And luckily for them, Washington State has been doing this for 9 years as a state, but we started really moving to vote by mail in the early 1990s. And so we've been able to share some of those hard lessons, like making sure it's really transparent and that you have good controls to compensate all of that accessibility of sending every single eligible voter a ballot. And really being able to refute that criticism that has come from the president, has come from the attorney general. I'm so confident in Washington's system that I've invited both of them or their staff or whoever they'd like to send to come here, to fly into Boeing Field. And within 20 minutes, they can be into 2 state-of-the-art facilities that are really leading the country in terms of absentee voting and vote by mail voting. And I really just think that using Washington as the example and showing how we can refute these baseless and unsubstantiated claims of fraud with the facts and what our experiences has been. And that's what's going to inspire confidence in people in this voting system.
Thank you very much. Now, Representative Tarleton.
It is the moment of our lifetime when we know that during the last 8 years, 10 years, that we lost the protections of voting rights when the US Supreme Court started to dismantle the US Voting Rights Act. That is a profound moment in American history. And that is the moment when Washington State said, we are not going to allow the dismantlement of the US Voting Rights Act to undermine the rights of Washington voters and of Washington future voters. Most other states did not do that. Wake up call. We have 5 states in the country that do statewide vote by mail. The rest of the country did not model us. The rest of the country did not take that path when they needed to. The rest of the country, whether they were led by governors who were Democrats or Republicans, the secretaries of state and the state legislatures did not lead on transforming their voting rights and access to statewide vote by mail. And here we are in a pandemic that has been undermining everything we believe in for 7 months, denying us access to our jobs and our families when they get sick and to our communities. We don't have a model in this country that values voting rights. And that is what I will do as Secretary of State.
Thank you very much. This next question is directed towards Secretary Wyman, but Representative Tarleton, I will give you a slightly modified question to respond. Kim, thank you for supporting mail-in voting and helping to achieve 500 ballot boxes spread out across Washington. My question is for you. Why do you financially support other Republican Secretary of States when they actively contradict actions that you supposedly stand for? For example, Frank LaRose in Ohio chose not to comply with a court order that would add ballot boxes across his state during postal delays. Or Paul Pate in Iowa, who rejected over 60,000 absentee ballots. How can Washingtonians trust you with our ballots, knowing that you have invested in politicians who have marginalized the integrity of our democracy?
I'm not sure what the investment piece is other than being part of the Republican Secretaries of State Association, where I have actually helped them, and supported them in their election runs. But remember, we have 50 states and the District of Columbia that are individual states that I believe have a states' rights option to run elections the way that they choose to, and that's through their legislatures, that's through their governors, and those have to be respected. And so when my colleagues make decisions based on what they believe is right in their states, they're held accountable by their voters. And so I will not cross a line and tell any state how they should do their business. I'm going to try to be a model. I know that Washington is a model, and there are states that don't follow our lead and take a different path. But my responsibility is not to tell Paul Pate or Frank LaRose or any of my Secretary of State peers how to do their job. I want to make them better, and I'm going to lead by example and give them a path to follow. And then that's going to be up to their individual states to do that. Again, I would say it goes back to my track record. And so how can you trust me? Look at the last 27 years. Look at the things that I've advocated for to make sure that every voter in the state has an opportunity to register and vote. And the ballot drop boxes are a great example, but it is, there's a long list that I don't have time to share with you, but it is my track record would be my answer.
Thank you very much. And now Representative Tarleton, how would you strengthen mail-in balloting, not only in Washington, but also encourage other states to follow in our steps?
So federal legislation, perfect example where you have opportunities to work with your congressional delegation, for example, to draft federal legislation that would propose a slate of voter access legislation similar to what we did here in Washington State. We introduced it over a 5-year period from 2013 to 2018. The vast majority of those pieces of legislation, same-day voter registration, free postage, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, automatic voter registration, the Washington Voting Rights Act, all passed in 2018. I was the House Majority Floor Leader. They moved through the House and the Senate with bipartisan support because they finally got to the Senate floor when Senate Democrats took control of the state Senate. The Senate majority leadership, who were Republicans from 2013 to 2017, would not bring them to the floor, even though they had bipartisan support. That's what it means to have a champion who will move legislation forward to try to figure out how do we get bipartisan support. I would support federal legislation, for example, that moved automatic voter registration through the states in compliance with state law. This is not something you jam down states' throats. You work with them to figure out how to work it as an implementable policy. We have a National Association of Secretaries of State, much as we have a National Council of State Legislatures. That's the body to work with to gain bipartisan support across the country for voter access and voting rights.
Thank you very much. We will now be moving on to some questions that were submitted live through comments or Facebook. So from Max,
Yeah, I know.
what does it mean to be the candidate What does it mean to the candidates to have transparency in your role of Secretary of State? Secretary Wyman.
Well, I think transparency is the heart of our democracy, and certainly a value here in Washington. That's why we have one of the best public records laws in the country, and I think this is one of those contrast moments where again, I've spent my career in the executive branch, and we have always been able to, or I've always been required to, submit our calendars, our email, our work of government as public disclosable documents. And my opponent, when the opportunity was there to pass a law to open up the calendars and the email documents to the legislature, voted to not disclose those. In fact, it's a little bit of frustration with the campaign because my staff has spent hours and hours responding to public records requests that are related to this campaign, and I can't do the same for my opponent's records. So for me, transparency is about public documents. It's very important in the Secretary of State's office because we oversee the state archives and the state records, and these are records that need to be available for the public and available for disclosure. So again, I'm running on my record of having over 30 years of disclosing and being very transparent in how I do my job. And I think it's imperative that the future Secretary of State does the same thing.
Thank you. And Representative Tarleton, your response?
It's really important to not have any secret meetings that are not on your calendar. I, like Secretary Wyman, have served in local government where I was subjected to the public disclosure requirements in this state for 5 years as a port commissioner. At the University of Washington for 8.5 years, I had my emails all disclosed in my calendar as I was running for port commissioner in 2007 and 2011. And I can say through this election season, I have responded in my legislative office to dozens of public disclosure requests about many revenue bills that we passed to advance progressive revenue for this state in 2019, because I am the House Finance Chair and I do respond to all public disclosure requests. So world is changing. Things are moving forward. Transparency is not only for the people, but it is how we conduct ourselves when no one is watching. And I look forward to the opportunity to continue to serve the people of Washington.
Thank you very much. And now our last question of the night from Owen. Given that Secretary Wyman received more than $235,000 in campaign contributions from the Republican Party, and Representative Tarleton received more than $50,000 in campaign contributions from the Democratic Party, what will each one of you do in your next or first term in order to make sure that votes, not dollars, elect our leaders? I'll have Representative Tarleton go first. You're currently muted.
Keep mixing that up. I think the most important piece of information you just conveyed to all of the listeners is that you know who is giving us money. Because as the Secretary mentioned earlier, we have the most robust campaign finance disclosure laws in the country. And the legislature has taken additional actions to make sure that if there are independent expenditures, you have to state the top 5 spenders on independent expenditures. You cannot have them be on a TV ad and just says people to protect Washington. It has to be the top 5 donors to the independent expenditure. The parties, I'm a Democrat. Secretary Wyman is a Republican. Our parties have absolute legal rights to give resources to our campaigns, just as I have the right to donate to my Democratic Party organizations at the district level and at the county level and at the state level and at the national level. So I think it's very important that our state continue its path in open government and the strongest campaign disclosure laws of any state in the country. And I have always supported those, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you.
This is one of those moments where we really agree on something. I'm kind of excited. Absolutely. I think one of the strengths of Washington system, as I said before, is that transparency and the public disclosure. I'm not sure where the numbers came from. I'm going to assume that that $250,000 number that you threw out was from all three of my statewide runs for Secretary of State, because I don't recall getting that much money from the Republican Party. As this year, as far as I know, I have 5,000 from the Benton County Republican Party, but that's not to say I'm not going to. And as Representative Tarleton just pointed out, yes, I mean that is part of public engagement and civic engagement and our constitutional right of association. If the Republican Party wants to give me a check, they have, again, guidelines that are spelled out in the public disclosure rules, and they're disclosable and transparent. And if the Democratic Party wants to give my opponent money, they have that ability as well. And in fact, if the Democratic Party wanted to give me money, I would accept it. Okay. Just messing with you there. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think the answer to your question is, how do you know we won't be beholden to those corporate interests or those political interests? Again, I think you look at track record. In my opponent's case, you have a chance to look at her voting record. In my case, you have a chance to look at the record I have had in service as a county auditor and as Secretary of State. So we answer to you at the end of the day, and you get to vote us in or out of office because you're a voter.
Thank you very much. And it was nice to see you come together on that last question. So I will now be giving it back for closing remarks.
Hello again. I just wanted to thank each candidate for being able to attend tonight. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And each of the monitors, thank you for taking the time to attend tonight. And then if each candidate would like to say some final words, we can start with Representative Tarleton.
Thank you, North Central Washington young voters. Thank you for all of the questions by the moderators, as well as from the community that sent in questions. I am Gail Tarleton. I am running for Secretary of State. I have a different kind of experience to address the challenges of the future. I have worked in the federal government. I've worked in state government. I have worked in local government, and I've worked in both a for-profit company implementing federal government programs in international arena, and I have worked as elected officials at the state and the local level. And I've also worked in a nonprofit for 15 months here in Seattle, and I serve on the boards of 4 nonprofits here in Seattle. My community commitment is to the best interests of the people over the long run. And my record stands on the foundations of that commitment to the best interests of the people. It all starts with our democracy. We've had extraordinary opportunities in my lifetime to do work that changes the way people live around the world and in this country and in this state and in our home communities. That kind of a future requires knowledge of technology. It requires understanding of risk. It requires building partnerships with people from all walks of life, all experiences. I have built teams of people from Russia and Ukraine and the United States and Eastern Europe to solve some of the toughest problems we face in our society today. We are part of communities wherever we live. I am running for this job to make sure that voting rights, voter participation, voter access, wherever you are, as our state grows, becomes the objective of everything we do to build and strengthen our democracy as we come through these extraordinary times that we are in. The third decade is going to be all about all of you. And we need to make sure that you want your voice to be part of the solution. I look forward to having the opportunity to earn your vote. I would love to have an opportunity to meet you in person. If that day comes soon, I will be over in your communities. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and your communities tonight. And I hope everyone stays safe, stays strong, and look out for your ballots. They're coming very soon from a local auditor near you.
Well, throughout tonight, you've had an opportunity to hear about our experience, and I hope that I have demonstrated to you my leadership, my job-related experience, and my integrity. And when I look at the Secretary of State's office and this job, to me, the most important quality that the Secretary of State can possess is trustworthiness. And I say that because I've spent my career and dedicated my profession to ensuring that the right to vote is upheld for every single Washingtonian, and that we've built an innovative system here in Washington that leads the country. And I'm proud of that work. I'm proud to be an election administrator who's nationally and state certified. And I want to continue doing that work in the next 4 years, because I believe that our state needs this kind of leadership. It gets back to trustworthiness. I have the endorsements of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, over 50 election officials who've conducted elections at the state level and the local level, know the job best, and they trust me, and they're the ones who are endorsing me. And that is probably the most, the strongest case I can make to you tonight of why you should support me and why you should vote for me for Secretary of State. I have the experience of running over 120 elections, and we are innovative here in Washington State, and we're on the front edge for a reason. I want to continue doing this work for another 4 years, and I need your support. So I ask you tonight for your vote. I thank you so much tonight for putting this together and giving us an opportunity to be in front of all of you. And again, my name is Kim Wyman, and I'm Secretary of State, and I ask for your vote.